I shall, right, thank you, Chair, thank you, councillors. I'll share my screen straight away and get straight into this. Let's make sure that's the right one. Are we all okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just going to move my view across to that side. Okay, so this is a workshop about the proposed or some proposed and possible amendments to the 2015 dog control policy and the dog control bylaw.
Sorry, Graham, can you put it in presentation mode? You're doing display.
There you go. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so this is around the 2015 dog control policy and bylaw and some proposed amendments, which Carl will help you through those. We're here to basically tell you about what those proposed changes are, seek some directions from you on the significant proposals that you'll see on a slide shortly, or any amendments to those proposals, but also there were other proposals that were circulated to you at the end of last week, so you may wish to refer to those. We'll also be seeking a direction as to whether you want us to proceed with this now or just hold off for the time being. But if we are to proceed, then also to identify the time frame for this particular project. I'm going to hand over to Carl for all the background information.
Morning, everybody. So this will be familiar to the committee. You've seen some of these issues before. So this policy would be due for its statutory review in 2025. However, due principally to the request to look at the dog controls that apply to Kakapuku, the proposal was to bring this policy review forward. So that request is the main driver. You'll recall that this committee and the iwi Consultative Committee passed 2 resolutions previously as a way forward to address the request to prohibit dogs on the Maunga. Those were to discuss with the Department of Conservation around whether there were any possible management changes, and then the second resolution was to proceed with looking at this policy review as a means of considering that request. That request has been on our books for quite a while now. It hasn't progressed. We've made a commitment to look at it, so that is the main driver in this case for bringing this policy review forward. Memorial Park and Lake Tukutu, both the concept plans around those reserves include changes to areas which are currently dog off lead and would be making them either dog on lead or dog prohibited. Kiki Domain, the situation at the moment is that the entire domain is classed as dog off lead, and that is creating some issues in terms of use of sports fields and other activities that are occurring on the domain. So we're looking to redefine the specific area of the domain that's available for off-leash use there. So those are the 3 main changes in terms of existing reserves, but as Graham has said, you've got information there on some changes that are proposed to other reserves. So what we're trying to balance here is the desires of the animal control team and the objectives under the Dog Control Act to provide for animal welfare, while at the same time trying to cater for the community facilities team and their desires for developing reserves going forward, so we can hopefully get a balance. Effectively, the community facilities team own the reserves and they're used for off-leash purposes, so we need to work together. So we're trying to aim for that balance. But with those changes, it also makes sense to look ahead and see what other amendments can be made at the same time, because this will be the full public consultation process. It doesn't really serve any great purpose to just make a few small changes now and then still end up having to do a full review at a later date. So we might as well take the opportunity to look at all changes that we might want to do now, and that's including mapping out as much as possible what new reserves may be created in growth cells and other areas that are being developed around the district. So as much as we can identify those, include them now to save that work later. And just a couple of background statistics. So the number of dogs has increased more than 19% since the policy was last reviewed. So we now have over 9,000 registered dogs in the district. So the demand from those residents and those dog owners is only increasing. That's been matched by our provision of facilities. So dog bins, not a particularly exciting statistic, but just an indicator of where we have put extra investment into this area, and the agility equipment that we installed in Te Awamutu and Cambridge, which gets quite a good level of use. It's the next slide, Graham. So this table summarises again some of the more significant changes. So a couple that we've touched on already, some requests there for areas that are currently not dog exercise areas to move across, the idea being that if areas that are currently off leash are going to cease to be off leash, that we try and balance those with new areas that are. And that just summarises there some of the other drivers that are happening around the reserves in the background. Next one, Graham. In terms of the policy and bylaw itself, the policy and bylaw are, from a staff perspective, are working fairly well. We're not suggesting any major changes to the actual text of the bylaw itself. It doesn't make any reference to emergency management at the moment, so we're looking at essentially including the clause there, which just reflects the powers that a controller and others would have in a civil defence emergency in terms of being able to designate land for specific purposes under the umbrella of a declared emergency, just so it's clear that that would take precedence over the schedules and the policy and the bylaw. The policy is, primarily focused on dog control. So some clarity, we have situations where people may be in charge of a dog, but they are not the owner. So a dog walker, for example, that may have a number of people's dogs with them at a time, just clarifying what control actually means in the public places. We have some clauses in the existing policy that allow us to issue notices or directions that are over and above what the legislation itself allows. Any notice issued under the legislation itself has an appeal provision attached to it. Our policy and bylaw are not clear on that at the moment. There are some notices where there is no appeal provision, so we're looking at including those to make it consistent with the process that the Act would follow. The disqualification period, those councillors sitting on the regulatory committee will have seen this from time to time, where the Act allows us in certain circumstances to disqualify a dog owner for up to 5 years. And generally 5 years has been our default position. We are looking at having more of a graduated scale dependent on what the offences or the issues are that are leading to that disqualification, so that we don't default to the 5 years, that we have some more guidance around whether that disqualification should be 1, 2, 3 years in addition. And the proposal is also to reduce the review period of the policy and the bylaw from the statutory 10 years, mainly because of the growth that is happening in the district, to give us a little more flexibility to deal with some of these requests and new areas as they come online, rather than having to wait a significant number of years before we can include them. So one suggestion has been, rather than 10 years, that we have a 5-year review period.
Okay, so if you would like us to proceed with this now, we've got some work to do in the next week or so. But actually, a lot of that work that Carl's just outlined is not particularly major. It probably sounds bigger than it's actually going to be. So really, we've just got some documents to prepare. The determination report is actually already written and ready to come to you. The other reports and the draft policy statement of proposal, we're actually intending to bring this all to you on one day at your main meeting. We think we can do that. And we would also like to be talking to some of the dog groups in the community to tell them what it is we're up to, and also to reassure them as to trying to get that balance between sites that might be more restricted and those that are less restricted, but also to gauge their reactions prior to formal consultation. And if we proceed, then our aim is to have a hearing of submissions on our planned hearings day on the 9th of August, when there'll be probably two or three projects for hearing the submissions there. This is all supposing, of course, that you would like to get this done and dusted before the end of this council triennium. So we think we can do it. It's going to be a hard week, but that's life. So open this up through you, Chair, for any discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Graham and Carl. Claire had her hand up first, then Mayor Jim.
Yeah, thanks very much. And it looks great. I'm pleased that you're giving consideration to the use of the reserves, whether they'd be on leash or off leash and that kind of thing. I did have some questions about Pirongia. For instance, there's no mention of the Sainsbury Road Reserve or the Sainsbury Road Forestry Block. And I do know particularly the Sainsbury Road Forestry Block that a lot of people with dogs do use that area and really appreciate it. In fact, I did get some feedback from some people when I was up there a couple of weeks ago that they'd love it if a loop could be created by linking the two forestry roads that sort of give access to that area, so that people could walk up one and then cut across at the top and then come back down the other as a separate route to any mountain bike track, because it would be really appreciated by both dog owners and also horse riders. And I'd just like to say it was good to see that you're considering a dog exercise area of some form in that new subdivision that's happening in Pirongia to the east. I guess it's the Browns and the Van der Sands and Raymer one, because there is quite a big reserve area in there. Yeah, thank you.
Cool, thank you. I've noted those. The Sainsbury Road ones at the moment would be dogs would be allowed access, but they'd be on leash under the current requirements. So I'll note that as one that we can include in our review list.
Cool. Thank you, Carl. Mayor Jim, Philip, and then Mike.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And if we think of any policy change, this one's likely to generate the most heat, I would imagine. So a couple of questions or comment first. I was aware of the issue of Kakepuku and wanting to change to dog prohibited in that area, but I'm just wondering whether we've had a large number of complaints about some of the other areas that we're suggesting that dogs be prohibited, because Memorial Park, Lake Te Kuutu, the Kihi Domain, certainly limiting it on playing fields. But just about every second person you see in some of these areas has got a dog. And I would imagine that there's going to be some significant kickback on the likes of probably Memorial Park and Lake Te Kuutu in particular. Huge number of people walking their dogs around there. And as I'm only there infrequently, but they all seem to be well behaved on leashes, etc. Have we had complaints about the amount of dogs in those particular areas?
Through the chair, a lot of these areas we will have both sides of the spectrum. They'll certainly be very very popular and well used by dog owners, but then we'll have people who don't own dogs who don't think that use is compatible. So we'll see both ends of the spectrum there. Memorial Park and Lake Te Kutu have both been progressed through the concept plans that have been, I'm not sure if they're formally adopted, but certainly was proposed through that process. So there has already been some public consultation around that. They're probably good examples of where the animal control team's aspirations and community facilities aspirations may not be on the same page. That is something that we will need to work through as part of this process and see what submissions we get on those areas.
Yeah, so I was just sort of thinking in these areas where there hasn't been significant requests to change it, why are we suggesting the change, I suppose? Because if we're going out and promoting a new bylaw, it would be better, I suppose, from my perspective, if the feedback came back requesting that dogs be prohibited in some of these areas rather than us promoting it, if we haven't got a genuine problem.
Yeah, going through the chair. So yeah, I think community facilities motivation for that is that the dogs off lead in particular is not compatible with where they see those reserves being longer term in terms of the focus of the use of those areas, and that's been the motivation from that side.
Yeah. Look, I'm not worried about controlling them and requiring them to be on leads. It's just where we're going to prohibit them is likely to be an issue. So that's certainly my comments. And the other one, in some of the, I suppose, Peak Lake reserves, for argument's sake, where we're banning dogs, my understanding is that still a number of those reserves are used for hunting purposes, for particularly, obviously, duck hunting. So some reference to that might need to be included.
Yes, noted. Thank you. That would make sense.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Mayor Jim. Good catch. Philip, and then Mike, and then Marcus. I knew Marcus would have something to say.
Thanks, Madam Chair. A little bit following on from Mayor Jim, with our towns growing, we're going to have some areas that are going to be restricted, that are currently off lead. That only really leaves our green belts and what have you for our dogs to exercise on. The designated dog area on Wordsworth Street over in Leamington, that's really popular. Is there other areas on the northern side of Cambridge, northeastern side of Cambridge, that we could look at as a designated dog area for that side? And along McLean Street there, we have got they've got the swings and slides, but there is a big area along there that potentially could be used for a dog designated area, exercise area. So, I understand that we need to review this every so often, but our town is growing, and like Jim says, so many people do have dogs, and so we do need to make an area for them too, to be able to exercise their dogs. We do have to consider them, not just to consider the safety of our people, but the public, but also got to find areas for them to exercise. So can we look at other areas like McLean Street along that area there as a designated dog area? If somebody could just make a comment on that, please.
No, definitely have noted that down, so we'll go back and continue our conversations with community facilities around what other potential areas that are not currently subject to off-leash could be added, and not forgetting we are going to be looking at growth cells and new reserves that are coming in the future as to whether they're suitable as well.
Yep, that's great. Thanks, Cal. And along where Oaks, along the green belt there, where Oaks is now, there's a huge amount of dogs going along, people walking along there. It's very popular, of course, with cycling and walking and everything. And as I've mentioned to you before, a dog bin along there would be very welcome, because there's heaps of dog walkers going along there. So, yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Mike.
Yeah, thanks through the chair. Look, I'd just like to move on from, or push on a little bit further on Jim's comment, and I'd actually like to ask for a change here, Carl. And I'd like to get some feedback on the Memorial Park. It's a massive change from off-leash to no dogs at all. And I look at Lake Te Kutu, which is what I'm going to talk about, I guess. And I don't think we should go out with a negative and get feedback on that. It's too easy to leave it. I would much rather just put in the status quo of the off-leash, at least for Lake Te Kutu. I personally see no issue there, getting feedback on that rather than jumping right to the sort of end of a spectrum of dogs prohibited. So I understand the staff's view, but however, I don't agree with it in terms of how it's worded here to go and get public consultation on this. So I'd much rather, and I'd like some feedback from the others too here. I'm absolutely opposed to that. Dogs prohibited at Lake Te Kutu from the current off-leash exercise area.
Okay. Marcus.
Yeah, I agree with the others. If people want to walk their dogs from along the cycleway, like from the rugby club through to Memorial Park, does that mean that you can't actually use that walking track along the riverway if we make it dogs prohibited? And making dogs prohibited on Kakapuku, that sort of takes away one of the last mountain sort of area that you can actually go and walk your dog. And it doesn't really, there's no really other spaces around that you can, because you can't take dogs on Pronga unless they have permits. So it's a bit sad. So I'd definitely like to go out to the communities and certainly ask them to get feedback before we sort of go with the dogs prohibited option.
No, thank you. Through the chair, that is, would certainly be the intention, would be to gain feedback on these proposals before we progress them further.
Yeah. Liz.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, I'm just recalling, probably showing my age here a wee bit, but I remember, Carl, when we did public consultation on changes to dogs and dog areas and leash and on-leash and all that kind of thing, we had these really great engagements, a really meaningful engagement where we invited the public to come to our council offices, and we sat down with bits of paper and looked at the current areas and things like that. Do you recall that? Because that was really good engagement, and I remember getting a room full of people. And I kind of wonder, with this again, I think second to character of Cambridge is probably dogs in Cambridge. So I really want to, again, make sure we get this right. And that particular way of engagement I felt was really useful. So is that something that we can look at in in-person sessions again? Is May's a good time?
I remember those sessions too, Liz, and we got some really good feedback and definitely good engagement from the dog owner community.
Yeah, I agree too. Yeah, it was excellent.
Yes, through the chair, that was this exact process in 2015, and at this stage, our intention is certainly to use user groups again in one form or another to inform this discussion.
Fantastic. That's good to
Sorry,
hear.
through the chair, I just want to just pick up on my point though, because it hasn't really been answered. So going from dog off leash to dog prohibited, I'd like to see that in the yellow of at least dog on leash to go to the community with that in Lake Te Kutu. That at least you can get dogs, and as Marcus is it connects that lake is right in the middle of town. It connects so many parts of our town. Connects from one side of a town up into the business area, for instance. It's a real connection, that lake. I'd like to at least see that changed from the current state to at least dogs on leash and get some feedback on that.
Yeah,
but I'd like some feedback on it.
I think we can word the public consultation any way we like, obviously, so we can summarise what the drivers are for change in each of these areas, perhaps without having the indicated change as part of that information, and then just see what feedback, what direction that feedback points us to. When this table is really for your information in terms of what the requests are from the different parties and where those requests may lead, but we may not need to, explicitly say that in the information that goes out initially.
Right, thanks for that, Carl. Yeah, no, that would be good, because it's a bit leading otherwise. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd support Mike's request there if he's wanting feedback on that. So dogs on leash. Yep.
I was sorry, Susan.
No, way, go Claire.
Oh yeah, thanks. I support what Marcus and Mike has too, in that I think you have to have an idea of how they connect, or routes that people might be taking their dog to walk. But I think it's important to indicate, Carl, what staff are looking for based on requests they've had from various stakeholders, because I think people have to that are making submissions have to understand what might end up as the preferred change or whatever. I mean, I think that would be okay to say that there's been a request to have dogs prohibited in these particular parks, but we're looking for your specific feedback on it. And also, could there be parts of the park or particular routes that might allow a dog on leash, but there'd be other parts of the parks or reserves that would be dog prohibited? Like, I mean, if you were taking a route kind of approach, that would be possible. But if you're taking a blanket approach, obviously that would be more problematic. That's all.
Yeah, thank you. I'm thinking that perhaps we would explain the options in each case. So this is the feedback we've received. These are the potential options available to council, and that may very well be, yes, different areas are subject to different controls.
Okay, so given some of the requests that have been made in the origin potentially for this review coming forward, I think it's really important we hear from Miriata. So Miriata, you've been very patiently waiting there. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I was going to say, Susan, no, just kidding. But yeah, I just really do support the consultation process, absolutely, because some of these are big shifts, like Mike has mentioned. What I do want to kind of emphasise, though, is that mana whenua are a priority group within some of these areas in those discussions, that if we go solely by votes and by population, mana whenua will always be outvoted. So I really need to just emphasise the point that, and I know from Kakipuku, mana whenua there were not so supportive of dogs being there. So in that respect, I'm supportive of that, obviously as Te Kanohi, but also from just with regard to the spiritual, cultural and archaeological values there that have been stated. But the same also for Ngāti Apakura, perhaps around the Memorial Park in Sawamatu. I'm sure, Carl, you've probably done some consultation there, but please don't forget them in this process. That's all I have to say. Amihi.
Kia ora through the chair. So this item is on the iwi Consultative Committee agenda for tomorrow, and it's certainly been noted the need for specific consultation in that space, because one of the items of feedback from last time was that there was no evidence that had occurred in 2015, and that's what has created some of our issues now, where different groups thought that there had been changes to the rules when in fact there hadn't been, and that was due to the communication when this process was undertaken in 2015. So certainly keen to ensure that does not happen this time around.
Thanks, Carl.
Thanks, Carl. Lou, you have your hand up.
Madam Chair, just quietly with looking at, I agree with Kiki Domain. I actually am a dog walker. I don't have a dog, but my granddaughter does, and my daughter does. So I do walk dogs, and I agree totally with what Claire was saying earlier, that maybe we look at route and be able to walk along a route with dogs on leash. And I do agree with what you said, Mike, also, that going from off leash directly to dog prohibited is probably a bit difficult. I do think we want to allow people the option to be able to transit through something with a dog on leash in a responsible form. This is really particularly through Memorial Park, because if we link that up to the rail or to the trail to Lake Naroto, not only will cyclists use it, but also people such as myself who walk and will enjoy walking along with the dog along that route. So yeah, I just wondered whether we've got to look at this in a total situation rather than just an isolation, one or the other.
Noted, thank you.
Thanks, Lo. That's a really good point to raise. Mike, did you have something you want to add, or you just left your hand up?
Yeah, no, I haven't. Yeah, all right. So, Carl, yeah, I guess the point around going to the public about who it's been raised by, I think is quite important. So if this is predominantly come from staff, then I think staff need to own that that's where it's come from, that dog prohibited thing. If it's not largely come from the public, whether it's mana whenua or the public, and something's predominantly come from staff, wherever it's come from, I think it needs to go in there. But I would much rather this just going middle of the road and getting feedback than going one extreme to the other. Well, not one extreme, but one to the other. So it needs to be crystal clear that this has come from somewhere. The other thing is and Miriata, and I'm talking about Late Kutu here. So I understand that Mara Hupara, is it development of Mara Hupara? All right, so, but there's some obviously there's massive cultural significance there. The flip side with dogs, of course, which were introduced back in the day, is they are a massive part of people's well-being. A lot of people, if they don't have a kid, they have a dog sort of thing. After they have kids, they have a dog. It actually becomes part of the family, part of the whānau, and it is part of what people do in their daily and weekly lives. So, yeah, I think connection with that lake is really important for the whole community. And a lot of people, as Liz alluded to, have got dogs in this town, whether we like it or not. It is part of their family. Cheers.
Yeah, Miriata, you'd like to respond to that, no doubt.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mike. I do get it. Obviously, I'm a dog person too, but I have the luxury of living in the country, I guess. But but do take on your sentiments, absolutely. I do want to make sure we're checking in though with Ngāti Korokikahukura, Ngāti Haua as well. I mean, they may come back and say, "Oh, look, it's been happening for years, and it's not impacting too much significantly." It's just the fact that I think we should still engage in that process of speaking to them.
Right, kia ora for that.
Ka pai.
Yeah, points well made, both Mike and Miriata. So can I ask you to close down your presentation so that I can actually see everybody? Excellent, thank you. Can I take it, gentlemen, that you've been given a pretty good steer? You've heard all a variety of ideas and thoughts around specific areas and also the proposed changes in their totality or generally. You're comfortable that steer is clear enough and you're not left too perplexed by it all?
I think there's plenty of steer there, Chair. One of the things that I'm picking up is that there's quite a lot of conversations that I think we need to have, particularly with the community services team, and also I think more pre-engagement's going to be necessary. And I think looking at that timetable I think we're going to really struggle to get this back to you on the 3rd of May. We can see whether we can do it for the June meeting, which would then sort of puts the pressure on it more towards dealing with the submissions that come in, or we accept that this is something that's going to roll over into the next council triennium. The important thing probably is to get it right. This is going to be potentially controversial. Certainly will arouse a lot of community interest. So the whole process might be drawn out because we've got a lot of issues and a lot of submissions to consider. Plus, of course, a lot of early engagement feedback as well. So we may need to take our time, but we'll do the best we can at driving it forward to get a good outcome as soon as we can.
Thanks, Graham. Mayor Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Look, I agree, Graham. We've got to get it right. Certainly don't want it just dragging on. So I think the important issue is to obviously get it right, but have a good timeline drawn up so that we can let people know that have made comments already that it is under action and this is a timeline, so that people can understand that there is going to be some decision made. And I'm thinking particularly of Kakapuku. There's been concern raised over a number of years now, and it appears that we're doing nothing. But I genuinely think we've got to get it right. So yeah, let's work on working out a timeline that's achievable, and we can give some confidence to anybody that's making or wanting to make submissions what that timeline is. Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair.
Yeah, cheers, Jim. Any other comments before we conclude this workshop? No, I don't think so. Great. Well, thank you, Carl and Graham.
Thank you.
I think we've given you a bit of a steer there, and we look forward to seeing the matter come back to us in the fullness of time.
Okay, thank you very much.